Joe Biden's response to withhold weapons in a war that Israel cannot afford to lose. What did we do after we were attacked in Pearl Harbor? What did we do to end the war against the Japanese? We dropped 2 nuclear weapons on 2 Japanese cities to make sure our soldiers didn't have to invade Japan, where you could have 1 million lives lost. What is Joe Biden doing? He's making it impossible for allies throughout the world to trust us. He's making it hard on Israel to win. What is Joe Biden's response to withhold weapons in a war that Israel cannot afford to lose?
This is Christopher John Bjorkness. It is May 9th, 2024. Zionist Israel First Republican Senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, is trying to incite Israel to use nuclear weapons against the Palestinians of Gaza, and he is trying to scapegoat the United States for this plan, which the Israelis have had for quite some time. Lindsey Graham is simply a megaphone and spokesman for the Israelis who desperately want to drop nuclear bombs on the Palestinians and the Iranians. And the Israelis, in chorus with Senator Graham and many others, are trying to scapegoat the United States for this pre-existent desire that they have to wage nuclear war on Arabs and Iranians. So the way that they're scapegoating the U.S. is by noting that Biden is withholding smart munitions from the Israelis because they invaded Rafah and crossed his red line, and they are committing genocide against more than 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. So rather than ending that genocide, they blame the United States for their continued use of dumb bombs and their slaughter of civilians, and they're claiming that this slaughter of civilians is now due to the fact that Biden is withholding smart bombs. And they are scapegoating the United States for their desire to drop a nuclear bomb on the Palestinians of Gaza by saying that because the U.S. is withholding smart bomb weaponry and other munitions to be used against the Palestinians, that they are therefore obligated to drop a nuclear bomb on the Palestinians, when in fact they are obligated to end their inhuman genocidal slaughter of the Palestinians. And they're playing the same games with the Iranians. They're saying that because the U.S. is not taking out Iran, that they're going to be forced to utilize nuclear weapons against the Iranians. And this is part of a global drive towards nuclear war. The Russians are openly threatening both strategic and tactical nuclear weapons attacks on Ukraine and on the West. We have Macron in France, who was initially engaged in appeasement with Putin at the beginning of the war, and the entire West was saying that they did not want Ukraine to win the war when Putin invaded Ukraine. Instead, Macron and many in the West were initially calling for capitulation to Russian aggression and appeasement to Putin with his nuclear threats that have been ongoing since 2014. He's been routinely flying nuclear bombers around Alaska in the United States and around Sweden and Japan for decades. And the West fought this war in a half-assed manner with half-assed measures that were intended to ensure that Ukraine not defeat Russia. The sanctions programs were minor and only ensured that Russia would benefit financially and economically from them, that China and India and Azerbaijan would also benefit from the sanctions regime, which was always stalled, delayed, and only minor measures that they knew would be ineffective and would have the opposite effect and would benefit Russia instead of defeating Russia. They have not supplied the weaponry that Ukraine needs to win. They have taken off the table for the whole initial phase of the war the prospect that NATO would engage in the fighting. Turkey did very little to seal off Russian naval vessels entering into the Black Sea and being able to transport troops and munitions to Crimea and to the forces of Donbass and throughout that corridor. So the whole war was a sham. They had no intentions of winning it, and they openly stated that from the beginning, that they did not want Ukraine to win because they were intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats. And we have been sending tens of billions to Ukraine and to Israel, but we have neglected developing an advanced, most modern nuclear deterrence system in the West. America has not been dumping enough funds into developing hypersonic cruise missiles, into developing more advanced ballistic missiles, into developing more potent nuclear warheads to be utilized on those cruise and ballistic missiles. We have not been working with our allies properly to provide the adequate defenses for Ukraine and to not take any option off the table. If we were to fight this war, we had to be in it to win it, and we certainly were not. And we are now headed towards a President Trump administration, which will continue to subvert NATO and benefit Russia and China. We have the Russians for decades in consort with the Chinese waging hybrid, non-linear warfare against the United States. We have a fifth column in the alternative media and the Republican press and Republican Party of Russian assets, waging perpetual psychological warfare on Westerners, brainwashing Westerners to hate themselves and to celebrate our Russian, Chinese, and North Korean enemies, and to view the prospect of our complete annihilation as if it were the salvation of the human race. We desperately need to be building up deterrence. The best way to not fight the Russians and the Chinese is to make that fight unwinnable for them. We need to prevent, especially Chinese espionage of our development of very advanced hypersonic cruise missiles and new ballistic missiles. We need to keep Israeli espionage out of the U.S., Chinese, Russian, and North Korean espionage out of the United States, and our government has not. Instead, our government has been deliberately facilitating the open transfer of American weapons technology to Israel, China, and ultimately to Russia. In another way, nuclear war is being made more likely by the fact that our conventional weapon supplies are getting eaten up and are not being properly replenished, and there is not proper development of new weapon systems. We need directed energy weapons on satellite platforms. We need better radar systems on platformed on satellites so that we can watch all of these developments around the world. And if nuclear weapons are launched at us, we can immediately respond. And the primary purpose of that is not so that there is a nuclear war, but so that nuclear war is deterred. Instead, we have this Russian fifth column telling us that directed energy weapons platformed on satellites are starting fires around the world, that NASA is our enemy, that we should not be developing satellites, that satellites don't exist because the Earth is supposedly flat, and all kinds kinds of psychological warfare. And the Russians have been waging this against us for many, many decades, as have the Chinese. And our government is doing a very insufficient job of combating all of that. Macron has drawn 2 red lines in Ukraine in which he says France may well intervene, and that is if the Russian forces break through Ukrainian lines. And concurrently, the Ukrainians request Macron's assistance. He will send in French forces. France is, of course, a member of NATO. Poland is also likely to become involved. So this creates a disincentive for the Russians to break through Ukrainian lines, but not to withdraw, so that it becomes a frozen conflict. On the other side of that, we have Putin threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons if any Western forces become involved in Ukraine, and perhaps even if they do not, if Ukraine advances on Russia. Russia is threatening to utilize tactical nuclear weapons and has rewritten their laws to state that Crimea and southeastern Ukraine have been annexed by Russia, and therefore they have the legal framework in which to wage nuclear war against Ukraine if Ukraine makes successful advances. So this was engineered into a frozen conflict in which the Ukrainians and the Russians slaughter each other, and both Russia and the West participated in manufacturing this mutual slaughter, and this mutual slaughter is matched by the mutually assured destruction of Russia and the United States in the event of nuclear war. And all of that was engineered by Jewish people, primarily by the so-called Martians, who were Hungarian Jewish communists who grew out of Bela Kun's Red Terror and communism in Hungary, came to the United States. Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner convinced Albert Einstein to write a letter to President Roosevelt initiating the Manhattan Project. This was based upon Lisa Meitner's work with Otto Hahn, demonstrating that a nuclear chain reaction had been done in the laboratory, and therefore the atomic energy of the atom could be released virtually instantaneously and therefore make atomic and nuclear bombs possible. Edvard Teller, another one of the Hungarian Jewish Martians, then developed fission fusion bombs, thermonuclear weapons, and Robert J. Oppenheimer, an American communist Jew, led the Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb. He tried to hinder Edward Teller's thermonuclear weapons from being developed in the United States at the same time that his communist cohorts gave the Russians all of that weapons technology, including the weapons technology of thermonuclear weapons. And so the entire system of mutually assured destruction was created by Jewish people. It was part of an ancient Jewish plan expressed in the Midrash to set up the Leviathan and the Behemoth in a mutually consuming war, as I've described in many of my previous videos. But Israel, on the other hand, faces no nuclear deterrence from any power on earth. Israel is the only nuclear power that is not immediately threatened with a retaliatory strike if they utilize nuclear weapons against human beings, and that has got to end. We have to get all of the nuclear weapons out of Israel, and the United States has to make it crystal clear that should Israel utilize nuclear weapons in a first strike, which is not preemptive against nuclear attack, that they themselves will be met with a proportional nuclear strike from the United States. There has to be a credible deterrent to the Israelis utilizing nuclear weapons. And while that deterrent must always exist because they could always conceal nuclear weapons, we must engage in thorough international pressure to have all the illegally possessed nuclear weapons of Israel removed from the nation. They are a rogue nation committing genocide. They are an anti-democratic apartheid nation engaged in the racial genocidal slaughter of the Palestinian people. They are threatening to wage unilateral nuclear war against the Iranians, who have no deterrence, no credible deterrence against them, because the United States and NATO is providing a shield against their missile systems, and they have no nuclear weapons whatsoever. So there needs to be deterrence against the Israelis, just as the Jews ensured there would be deterrence against the West and America, should America ever utilize nuclear weapons. Another thing that has been going on is there are Jews calling for atomic warfare on the basis that there is this imbalance, and that the best way to turn the people that live among them into friendly people is to bomb them with nuclear weapons. And this is part of a very ancient set of religious tenets among the Jews, in which they state that in the end times, all of the Gentiles will take hold of their skirts and want to be their slaves. I can think of at least two ways in which they could make people want to be their slaves. One of those ways is to drop nuclear bombs on people and threaten to drop more and completely exterminate them. And then, of course, if there is no balance, if there is no deterrence, if there is no retaliatory strike, those people will either face submitting to the Jewish people as their slaves, or they will face death. This has always been the Jewish prescription for war. It is stated in Deuteronomy chapter 20, and leading forward all the way through to the end of Deuteronomy, in which it calls for the Jewish people to become the sole power on earth and to wipe out all the other Gentiles. But their method of war has always been first to offer slavery or extermination. And then if the nation submits, they become slaves. If they do not submit, they are to be completely exterminated. So let's look at some of these passages. In the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat, folio 32b, it says, anyone who is vigilant in performing the mitzvah, the commandment of ritual fringes, marriage, merits that 2,800 servants will serve him in the world to come, as it is stated, thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold out of all the languages of the nations, shall even take hold of the corner of the garment of him that is a Jew, saying, we will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. They will demonstrate that God is with them by dropping nuclear weapons on people. And Zechariah, this is a quote from Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23. And the Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists are saying that Zechariah chapter 14 foretells nuclear war on the Gentiles. On each corner of a Jewish person's garment with ritual fringes, 10 people from each of the 70 nations will take hold. That totals 700 people on each corner, 2,800 people all together. So how are they going to do this? You can see Jews and rabbis all over the world saying that, oh no, it's not that the Gentiles will be enslaved, it's that they will come begging to be slaves. So how is it that Jewish people could make Gentiles beg to be slaves? They could put in a cybernetic brain implant, kind of like Neuralink, in which their brains will be programmed to submit and become slaves. They can be hit with nuclear bombs and told that if they do not submit to slavery, that they will then be bombed again and be completely and utterly exterminated. And these are the ways in which they are planning to get the Gentiles crawling on their knees to grab hold of the skirts of the Jews and beg to be their slaves instead of being exterminated, as was the plan all along, as is made clear in Deuteronomy chapters 20 through to the end. This also very much relates to the story of Joseph in Egypt. When Joseph wanted to take over the power of the Pharaoh from his chariot and become the ruler of Egypt, Joseph first starved the Egyptians so that they had no choice but to become slaves of the Jews or face extermination through starvation. And in this way, Joseph got the Egyptians to trade their freedom for the food that they themselves had grown, and therefore enable them to survive meagerly as slaves of the Jews. And this appears in Genesis chapters 40 through 47. And this also relates to basically a retelling of that same story in Genesis, in the story of Esau and Jacob, where Jacob ensures that Esau will be famished and then trade away his birthright and blessings for a simple bowl of pottage of lentils. And so there again, we have the Gentiles represented by Esau being presented with famine and death, or giving away their birthright, their soul, their freedom, their inheritance of the world to come as the firstborn, the Jews are the secondborn, all in exchange for a paltry bowl of lentils. The entire Gentile world supposedly gave away its birthright to exist as free people, to have its own souls, to have its own life, and to exist in the world to come for a simple bowl of lentils, and all that has been given away. So first they're going to try to force us to be their slaves by threatening us with nuclear war, then dropping nuclear bombs on us, and then saying submit to slavery and obedience, or we will drop more nuclear bombs, or they will cause us to drop nuclear bombs on each other and annihilate all Gentiles. And either way it goes, in the end, they don't really want us as slaves because they now have robotics to serve as their Esau. So they're simply going to kill us all off. It's a no-win situation, no matter what route we take, if we oblige their agenda and follow their plans to fruition, as was laid out in the Old Testament some 2,500 years ago, specifically in the Septuagint. 2,300 years ago, they set forth all these plans to put us in this bind that we're in right now, and they are making their obligatory war offering to the Gentiles of the world, saying, submit to universal slavery or we will exterminate you. And the means that they are threatening to exterminate us with are nuclear weapons. So we need to create a deterrence. We need to get the politicians, the psychopathic demagogues that the political parties of the Western nations around the world are offering us, out of power. The political parties have deliberately ensured that we have no statesmen in power, and that the only interests which are represented in the halls of our governments are the interests of Jewry and the nation of Israel. We have to get those people out of power if we are to survive, and no one's going to do it for us. We need political candidates who are statesmen, who represent the interests of all people, indigenous people of their own nations, as opposed to deliberately working against them. We need to combat this fifth column of traitorous snakes that the Russians have created in the United States, together with the Israelis, which are convincing Western people that Western people are inherently evil and that the only salvation of humanity is for Western people to submit to their destruction at the hands of the Russians, Chinese, North Koreans, and covertly at the hands of the Israelis. But they usually get the gullible goyim to follow the plan of the Israelis in the name of fighting the Israelis. So at the same time that they say that they are great warriors against the Zionists, they are proposing that the best option in the presidential election is Donald Trump and secondarily RFK Jr., both of whom are committed Zionists. So in the name of fighting Zionists, they want to subvert our government and install the chief Zionists in the world who are affiliated with the apocalyptic messianic cult of Chabad Lubavitch. We need to combat this Russian propaganda, which tells us that outer space doesn't exist, that satellites with DEWs, directed energy weapons, laser beams, are setting fires around the world, and therefore the U.S. and NASA and our aerospace programs are evil and should be destroyed. We instead need to fund heavily our satellite systems, our satellite defenses. We need to develop hypersonic cruise missiles and improve our hypersonic ballistic missiles, and we need to ensure that they work and develop more effective nuclear warheads, not so that we utilize these weapons, but so that they serve as a credible deterrence. And we need to get all the nuclear weapons out of the hands of the Israelis and have the looming deterrence hanging over them that should they ever preemptively utilize, or not preemptively, but aggressively utilize nuclear weapons against anyone who does not themselves have credible nuclear deterrence against the Israelis, that the United States will then proportionately attack Israel with nuclear weapons, so that there is this deterrence against the Israelis, which does not exist today. And we have to get people like Lindsey Graham championing nuclear exchanges out of the halls of Congress and replace them with genuine statesmen who do not want to see humanity descend into nuclear war, who do not want to see all these prophetic plans of the Israelis fulfilled to exterminate the human race and leave only a remainder of Jewish people alive to enter into the world to come. And I wanted to show an additional clip of a rabbi talking about the utility of atomic bombs to convert enemies into friends, which fits in with this framework very well, which fits in with the Jewish method of war, iterated in Deuteronomy, iterated in Maimonides' Laws of Wars, of Kings and Wars. And let's have a listen. For some reason, it just doesn't want to play. Rabbi's not cooperating. Come on, Rabbi. Let us hear it. Well, maybe I have it subtitled, so I'll just read off what he said from the subtitles. They said, "Let's be friends." No, that's not working either. Oh, dear. Anyway. I want to thank all my donors who made this possible. Thank you, Carolus, Norbert, Federico, Umberto, Robert, at Alan Greenspun, Carolina, Gregory, Bob, Lance, Basma, Angelina, Jerry, Jeannie, Barry, Ali, Ryan, at John Garaitis, Anisha, Kelly, Mark, Kevin, Gary, Elton, Paul, Oliver, Wilson, and George. Thank you all very much. I deeply appreciate all the support. I appreciate all the people who have been retweeting my stuff on X. That is extremely helpful. I face strong shadow banning on all my social media, and I am deeply grateful to all the help that I am receiving. And I do want to keep people hopeful. Joe Biden is submitting to political pressure. We have awakened the world to this threat. There are protests taking place around the world, and Antifa is doing its best to co-opt and discredit those protests as violent agent provocateurs. But there are also decent, good people peacefully and lawfully protesting this Zionist genocidal aggression against the Palestinian people. I applaud them. And we have a whole generation of young people who are now aware of this imminent danger of extermination of the human race. And that is very good. We are starting to win. We are gaining momentum. Political pressure is being applied to Western politicians. We need political pressure applied to all the politicians around the world to stop this march towards nuclear devastation of the human race. And we can do it. We are doing it. And the momentum is on our side. These mad Israelis committing genocide need to be stopped. And it is shameful that we have Senator Lindsey Graham speaking of dropping nuclear bombs on people whom the Israelis want to commit genocide against. And we need deterrence to keep that from happening. We got to get rid of this Samson option, which is a sword of Damocles hanging over humanity, out of the hands of the Israelis. They have no legal right to these weapons that they developed. Edvard Teller helped corrupt the American government to keep the American government from responding to this threat, which now threatens all of humanity. So we need to assert a deterrence against the Israelis, and we need to force them to surrender all nuclear weapons that they have. And we need our government in the hands of statesmen and women who insist that the best interests of humanity are served, and who will recognize the fact that the Israelis are an existential mortal enemy of the United States, who is engaged in espionage, taking over our weapon systems to hand them over to the Chinese and Russians so that they can be used against us, corrupting our government to take our tax dollars and hand them over to our enemy, the Israelis, corrupting our political system, our press, and our financial system so that it serves the interests of the Israelis instead of the best interests of Americans, coercing our government to open our borders so that we are engaged in domestic turmoil perpetually, corrupting the Congress and the presidency, the White House, to ensure that the U.S. is engaged in perpetual self-consuming wars for the benefit of Israel, the chief target of those wars being the United States, because they want to bring down the Edom of America. And we have to get people to not be so gullible listening to this fifth column of alternative media of Russian assets calling upon the West to destroy itself and celebrate its destruction and enable our enemies to attack us without any deterrence, to constantly whittle away at our patriotism as the communists have always done. I want to thank you all very much for watching. I, again, want to very much thank my contributors. If you would like to contribute or would like to engage in further research into my work, You can find my books at cjbbooks.com. There are also donation links there. So thank you all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see all you good people next time.